Let's welcome in a new friend of the Grum. He is Kelley Ford, behind the K Ford ratings, which we have been quoting quite extensively here on the Grum the last few weeks. KFordratings.com is where you can find it. And Kelley joins us on the 42 Degrees of Source hotline. Good afternoon, Kelley. Welcome to the Grum.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So, this is that time where you're cranking out a bunch of new stuff and getting ready for the season. How would you differentiate your rankings maybe versus other rankings of its kind out there?
Yeah, so, what I'm trying to do in the power rating world is assign an objective value to every single FBS team relative to each other, right? And so at the core of what I'm doing, it's not different than what Bill Connolly's doing with SP Plus or Brian Fremeau with FEI or ESPN's FPI. There are a lot of different power rating models out there. What makes mine different, what I would say, is certainly its accuracy as it performs, relative to the larger set of power ratings. Bill and Brian, they're the best. They're the godfathers, and they always will be. So I'm not even suggesting, mine being more accurate than theirs, but just generally speaking, with the power ratings that are out there and what I benchmark against, the accuracy is certainly something that I'm excited about. But probably more importantly, it's, I would say, the way that I present the data. And this is not a slight to anybody else in the space doing this, but what I'm able to generate from kind of a graphic standpoint, because what I learned is that it really doesn't matter how sound or how accurate your data is. If I can't communicate it to the masses in a relatively simple way, then it doesn't really matter. And so what I've done over the last 5 or 6 years is really figure out how to best communicate to large audiences, a advanced model, but in simple terms. And it's easily digestible for most everybody. And so that's kind of what I've done with the K Ford ratings on the website, kfordratings.com. And I would say that at this point is what separates me from a lot of others out there. And again, there's a lot of really great work being done in the college football power rating space.
Kelley, one more kind of on the nuts and bolts before we get into this season. Predictive versus resume. Yours seems to be more of a predictive model.
So I do both, and that's a really good point, and that's something that not enough people talk about or understand, clearly the difference is the K Ford ratings are power ratings that is predictive. We are trying to project forward. What I do on every single, what will be now Tuesday, it used to be Monday, now it's going to be Tuesday this year. What I do on Tuesday is I publish my updated most deserving rankings. And so that will have nothing to do with the power rating. It will be all about what have you accomplished against your schedule relative to what would be expected if we viewed all 134 schedules through the common lens. And so power ratings, yes, especially in the preseason, we're looking at projections, looking forward. But the deeper we get into the season, the more and more informative the most deserving rankings become. And of course, by the end of the year, we want to look at who's the most accomplished team, who deserves to be in the playoffs, not who are the best teams on paper. Let's reward the teams that have actually proved it over the course of the year.
Kelley, do you know if will commissioners have, obviously everyone's got access to your data. You can just go to kfordratings.com, but have you had interactions with folks on the committee who have used your data and look to help shape their, decisions on who gets ranked where?
At this point, no. Certainly that would be a goal and an ambition of mine. I do know of some of the committee members. I don't know them personally, but I do as a day job. The ratings work is just a hobby for now. The day job is actually in college athletics. So I work in a Division I conference office. So I do rub elbows with some of the people in this industry. And certainly it would be great for one day them to be referencing my numbers along with many others as part of their conversations. But to this point, we're still building it. We're still building awareness, building the brand, all those things. And so, no, we have not gotten there yet, but certainly one day that would be a goal.
So, Kelley, diving into this season, I wanted to start, of course, with Nebraska since we're here in the state. One of the things that really jumped out to me when I was looking at your stuff earlier today is the 3 games or the 3 number of wins, rather, that it seems like are most likely. A 21% chance of Nebraska going 8-4, a 27% chance of going 7-5, 22% chance going 6-6. You bring those 3 together, and that's 70%, which seems to be right in line with what a lot of us are thinking about around here. When you look at the schedule top to bottom, what are the games that you think swing the record in the positive or negative and allows them to slide best within one of those 3 records?
So for swing games, what we're going to look at usually for most teams is anywhere from the 30 to 70% win expectancy. That lines up, with relative toss-up. Certainly, the closer you get to 30 or 70, the more of a favorite or underdog you're going to be. But relatively, or generally speaking, that's kind of a relative toss-up area. So if we look at Nebraska's schedule, with the first 7 games have greater than a 50% win expectancy. So it is feasible, not likely, but feasible that Nebraska could be 7-0 after 7 games. And then in the final 5 games, 4 of those 5, there's less than a 50% win expectancy. So certainly it's backloaded for Nebraska. But you're asking about those toss-up games, the ones that can really dictate which way the season goes. I'm going to look at week 2 at home against Colorado. That's a 56% win expectancy. Weeks 5 and 6, couple of conference games here on the road at Purdue at 67%. Rutgers at home is 63%. Indiana coming off an off week in week 8 is a 69% win expectancy. So between Purdue, Rutgers, and Indiana right there, those 3 conference games, the math would suggest that Nebraska goes 2-1 in those games. If Nebraska can go 3-0, certainly the season win total outlook is looking better. And then to close the year, on the back end, UCLA at home, week 10, that's a 57% win expectancy. Wisconsin, which is a big game, and week 13 is a 47% win expectancy. And then, of course, ending the year on the road at Iowa the day after Thanksgiving, a game everybody has circled every year, 37% at Iowa. So how many of those games can Nebraska win? Their record in those games, I think, will go a very long way in determining overall the general success or failure, at least from a record standpoint of this season.
A lot of folks might be wondering, Kelley Ford joins us. He is the man behind the K-Ford ratings, kfordratings.com. And for those of you watching it on the stream, we've got his Nebraska splash page, which you can see on his website, up on the screen for you. And if you notice, Nebraska comes in at number 40 overall after a season ago when they were down in the 50s. 59 is where they ended up. A lot of folks might wonder where some of the numbers come from. Like, for example, Nebraska's offense, only 120th. But this year, cut it in half, 61st in offense. Some folks might wonder, where does that come from, especially knowing that there's a lot of incoming talent, including guys we've not seen play at the college level, namely Dylan Raiola.
Yeah, for sure. And so Raiola brings a lot of excitement. Of course, the quarterback position is the most important in all of team sports. We know that. So if he can play at the level at which many are projecting, certainly Nebraska's season is going to go well, and perhaps even better than my numbers are suggesting. So just to be clear, and I know it's on the YouTube screen, so we're looking at it there. You're right. Last year, Nebraska, number 59 in my power ratings. Coming into this year, projecting number 40. So certainly I believe what Rule is building is in the positive direction. And I should just say, too, right off the top, I'm a big believer in Matt Rule. And it may not be this year, meaning 2024, but I do think whether it's 24, 25, 26, sooner or later, Nebraska is going to be competing at a very high level. And I feel very confident in saying that because Matt Rule has done it before. He did it at Temple. He did it at Baylor. He took over programs that were, quite honestly, in much worse shape than Nebraska was when he got there to Lincoln. And he turned it around. I fully expect him to do it here this year. Just to be clear about the offensive and defensive unit rankings this year for Nebraska as things project, I currently have this Husker offense at number 104. So it is an improvement on last year's 120, but I do have them at 104. That's why I'm saying if Raiola can play really well, that'll probably exceed that expectation. So the model's a little hesitant, doesn't want to dive fully in, but if Raiola plays well, that will certainly get better. The defense, again, projecting to be in the top 10 as it was last year. The 61 that you referenced is good news for Nebraska because that's in my schedule difficulty section.
Okay.
And so what I'm saying there is Nebraska is facing the 61st most difficult, or in other words, the 8th easiest of Power 4 teams collection of opposing FBS offenses. So Nebraska's got a top 10 defense of their own. They're facing, from Power 4 standpoint, a top 10 easiest schedule in terms of the offenses they're facing. So Nebraska should be at a minimum in each of these games this year, maybe with the exception of that Ohio State. That's going to be really tough, I think it's fair to say. But outside of that, that defense for Nebraska is going to keep them in this game, in every single game. So can the offense perform at the level we expect, or maybe even a little better? I think that'll go a long way into determining, that end of season win total that the Huskers get.
My apologies. I was reading this wrong. I'm out of my league.
Hey, Kelley, you mentioned Ohio State. I wanted to look at the top of the conference because it's pretty interesting looking at the overall power ratings. You have Ohio State 2 and Oregon 3 in the country behind only Georgia. And yet Oregon is the top team projected in the Big Ten for you. And obviously it's going to be a big deal because the winner of the league is going to get a top 4 seed. They won't have to play in the first round. The second place team will probably get get a home game though at the very least. Is the Oregon over Ohio State lean? It seems like that just comes down to the game being in Eugene this year. Am I correct in reading it that way?
That is absolutely a huge part of it. So when you're looking at the conference projections, and you referenced it on kfordratings.com, I do have Oregon with 7.8 projected average conference wins, Ohio State at 7.6. So Oregon just slightly ahead, even though, as you said, Ohio State right now is projecting about 1 point per game on a neutral field better than Oregon. So you're absolutely right that the game being in Eugene is certainly, that game being there in week 7, certainly a big deal. But it's more than just that one game. Let's look at the totality of the schedules of these two teams. If you look at just the conference schedule, so strip away the non-conference, just the 9 Big Ten games, which still sounds weird to say we're talking about Oregon. Oregon has the second easiest Big Ten conference slate in the conference. Second easiest. Ohio State is number 12 out of 18 on that, so that would make them, the 7th easiest. So Ohio State has a more difficult conference schedule. They do have to go to Oregon, which of course is included in that. And despite them being about a point better, that's how we get to Oregon having marginally, very marginally, 0.2 of a game higher win total projection in conference play.
Talking with Kelley Ford, K4Ratings.com, joining us here on the 42 Degrees The Source hotline. Georgia, no surprise. They are number 1 in your power rankings, and as you projected out your playoff, they are the national title pick. Any concerns that the off-field issues might affect them on the field this year?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I'll give my general disclaimer about the power ratings and the model. No model, no matter how good, that includes mine, that includes those of the godfathers of college football predictive analytics, no model can capture absolutely everything.
Right.
Every model has blind spots. There are intangible things in and around a program that cannot be quantified from a mathematical standpoint. So I will say that there are things about Georgia off the field around the program that certainly should be considered when you're evaluating their season projection as a whole. There are other things like schedule dynamics is what I call them. Is your team coming off of an off week? Is your opponent coming off an off week? So is there a rest advantage? Is somebody having to travel across the country to come play you, which again, in today's expanded landscape of conference membership becomes more prevalent? These types of things are not included in the weekly or season-long projections. And so what I say is the model gives us a really good starting point for conversation. It's a 30,000-foot view of any individual team, game, conference race, national championship race, all those things. And then we do need to drill down and provide that context. So you've asked me, are there things around Georgia's program that are cause for concern? I would say the answer is yes. Like, you'd be silly to just ignore them. However, with that said, I think that Georgia's talent that they have on the field, as well as Kirby Smart's experience now as a multi-time national championship head coach, and not to mention all the coaches or the titles he's won as an assistant at Alabama, I think there is enough structure there that once these games start being played, all that other stuff will kind of fade into the distance, and they will be focused and ready to go. It's a really tough schedule for Georgia. It's number 2 in the entire country, but even with that, I still have the Bulldogs favored in every single game. I've got a 48% chance to win at least 11 in the regular season. So they are issues. They are concerns. I'm curious to see how much that persists once the ball is kicked here in late August or early September. And my gut tells me that Georgia's going to be just fine.
Kelley, sticking in the SEC, I want to look outside of the big 3 of Georgia, Texas, and Bama. There is a clump of 5 teams right after that on your projected rankings: LSU, Tennessee, Missouri, Ole Miss, and Texas A&M, which are pretty much all right there within the same amount of win territory. Which of those 5 do you like the most to maybe break through and get that either 3rd or 4th playoff bid from the SEC?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting dynamic because out of that group, Ole Miss, LSU, they're probably the highest power rated. So they're the strongest teams. But then you look at the schedules that these teams are playing, and Missouri and Tennessee, those are the ones that kind of pop off to me, especially within conference play there. I'll say Missouri is a team just to keep an eye on because I have them number 15 in the power ratings. They're projected 6th in the SEC standings, but like you said, they are a half game back from being projected number 3. So they're a team that I have my eye on because, yes, they're really good. I mean, this could be the most talented Missouri team that we've seen since 2018 maybe, or maybe even throughout the whole college football playoff era, potentially. and the schedule really sets up nicely. Missouri is the only team in the SEC outside the top 30 in schedule difficulty. It's the second easiest conference-only slate. So of the 8 SEC games, only Texas has it easier in conference play. So Missouri is a team, I think, that right now only 2 games projected under a 50% win expectancy. If they can go 1-1 in those, and they're against these other teams, A&M, Alabama on the road, right? If they can go 1-1 in those, I mean, this is going to be a Missouri team that could win 10, 11 games. And I think that for that reason, there's someone to keep an eye on to potentially make the playoff a little bit unexpectedly, right? Because Missouri has not been, during the CFP era, a regular or even a one-time CFP participant.
Kelley Ford, KFordRatings.com, joining us on the 42 Degrees The Source hotline. I wanted to ask about Notre Dame because the Irish, despite being number 7 in your power rankings, they miss out on your projected playoff with a 10-2 projected record. And how much of that is because they have one of the weaker Power 5 schedules, or Power 4 schedules, I guess now we can call it, in the country?
They do, and that is unusual. Usually Notre Dame's kind of up there in terms of schedule difficulty. This year, like you said, I've got them number 58 out of 68. So it's the 11th easiest Power 4 schedule in the country. There's not a single game all year in which my numbers make Notre Dame a underdog. 50% win expectancy at A&M right out of the gate is the only game with less than a 65% win expectancy. It is for that reason that the math suggests Notre Dame would need 11 regular season wins to feel really good about their chances of getting an at-large. And of course, we know Notre Dame's only path to the playoff is via the at-large, not being in a conference and no AQ access. That being said, and I've talked about this before, if Notre Dame is sitting there at 10-2 at the end of the year, I know what my model says, I know what the math says from a deservedness standpoint. I do not believe, and this is this is not what I believe is right, but this is what I believe is factual. I don't believe the committee in any year, this year or otherwise, would leave out a 10-win Notre Dame team from the playoff. I just don't think they would. I don't agree with that, but that is kind of what my position is on this. And I think based on how the committee has ranked teams in the past and the somewhat of a preference that they would show to a big brand like Notre Dame, I think if Notre Dame gets to 10, whether they deserve it or not, and they might, it depends how everything looks, right? We're projecting right now. We don't know what the resumes actually look like at the end of the year. But I think if Notre Dame gets to 10, they're certainly feeling good about their playoff chances this year. 9 with a schedule like this, I don't think so. I think it would take a lot of carnage elsewhere for Notre Dame to get in with 9, given the relatively easy schedule by Power 4 standards they're playing here in 2024.
Hey, Kelley, what do you think that the committee is going to do in terms of like ranking group of 5 teams so we know who is in the mix? We stumbled down a rabbit hole yesterday of discussing that, and I'm looking at your projected playoff right now, and you have Boise 38, UTSA 39, Liberty 49. You can't help but notice that those teams are well outside of the top 25. Obviously, like they're going to sneak some of those teams in on the back end, right? So we kind of know going into mid to late November who's in the mix from that part of the country.
Yeah, they certainly will. And we've seen that in years past, and we see it with the AP poll. You always get your token or tokens group of 5 teams or non-Power 4 teams that sneak in that 20 to 25 mix. And without fail, every single year, the most deserving rankings suggest that is ranking them too high. However, now that one spot in the playoff is reserved for a non-Power 4 champion, I do think that, there's really not a lot of harm. It lets people know where teams are standing. So I do expect at least one group of 5 teams, if not every week, certainly by the time we get to the last 2 or 3 rankings, to be included at a minimum in that 20 to 25 range from the committee's ranking.
Wrapping things up with Kelley Ford, KFordRatings.com. There's a lot of stuff already there on the site. Some of the stuff, obviously all the stuff that we've put up on the screen for those of you watching in on the stream are there, and a lot more individual team pages for everybody. But you do have a couple of things that are still to come before the season kicks off, and that is the what if and the most deserving rankings. Explain what those are.
I'm going to start with the most deserving. So every single Tuesday during the year, what I'll do is I'll update, everybody's record relative to what would be expected given the schedule they played. I can ordinarily rank 1 to 134 which teams are most deserving, which teams have accomplished the most this year. No preference for anything done in the past. It's what have you done on the field this year? That's how you're going to be ranked every single week. And of course, that ranking becomes more informative every single week. Because after week 1, you've only played 1 game. That's 100% of your resume. It's not very informative. Every single week, it gets more and more informative. And by the end of the year, that's what should be driving the conversation around the CFP. The what if rankings, I'm actually really excited you asked about that because It was the 2021 Nebraska Cornhuskers that inspired me to do the what if ranking. And what I do here with the what if is every single Wednesday. This will be the third year I've done the what if. Fourth year, 21, 2, 3, now 4. This will be the fourth year I've done the what if rankings. Every single Wednesday, what I do is any college football game that was decided by one possession or went to overtime. And you have to include that distinction there because I think it was 2 years ago now, Kansas and West Virginia played a game that went to overtime, and Kansas ended up winning by 13 points because they scored a touchdown and then they picked off West Virginia and ran it back the other way in overtime, and they ended up winning by 13. Obviously, that's not one possession, but we're going to count that as a one-possession game since it was in overtime. So any game that's one possession or overtime, flip the result. So if you lost by 4, nope, you actually won by 3, or whatever it is, right? If you won by 7, nope, you actually lost by 1, or whatever. However that math works, it's 8.5 points is what I add to the losing team score to make that work. We flip the results, we run it through the most deserving rankings, and we see, okay, in the what if world, the one possession world, these would be the most deserving rankings. And I know it probably breaks hearts there, or maybe it's a joke now at this point. But in 2021, Nebraska ended up going 3-9. This was a top 30 power rated team by my numbers. In the what if world, the Nebraska Cornhuskers would have been 11-1, playing for a Big Ten championship. It would have been number 1 in the country by my most deserving ranking, heading into Indianapolis to play in the Big Ten championship. So I almost called them my Nebraska rankings, and ultimately I decided, no, let's go with the what if. But in my heart, these are the Nebraska rankings because 2021 Nebraska under Scott Frost inspired me to do the exercise.
Real quick, Kelley, what was Nebraska last year? Because they also had a lot of close games.
Oh, gosh, I don't have that one off the top of my head. I could DM you and get you the answer there.
No problem.
Last year's off the website, but I can go find that for you.
All right.
Awesome.
Kelley Ford, great stuff. kfordratings.com. Make it a bookmark and check it out. There's a lot of cool stuff already there and a lot more to come, and we'll certainly be quoting these all season long. Kelley, we really appreciate it. Thanks for being a new friend of the Grum, and I'm sure we will catch up during the season.
Absolutely, guys. I really appreciate it. Last thing, I did find it. I had Nebraska last year. You would have been 9-3 heading into conference championship game weekend. You would have been number 26 in the most deserving rankings of the what if world. So thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
You bet.
Thank you, Kelley.
I knew he could find it.
Oh,
I was just stalling long enough.
Maybe this year they'll finally get it done.
kfordratings.com.
That was fun, man.
Yes, it was.
The thing that stands out, not only is all of the great information and data, but he presents it in a very nice and neat way to look at.
Except for when I misread, because I was looking.
When you misread,
I don't know.
stuff.
I was looking at the schedule difficulty, and for some reason it stood out. But yes,
very digestible.
But
Even I
is.
can read it.
And when Nick can read it,